Welcome, everybody. My name is Bill Cavanaugh. I'm the director of the Center for World Catholicism and Intercultural Theology here at DePaul, and I really appreciate you coming out tonight. Please enjoy the hospitality. There's lots of food, and don't be shy if you want to get up at any point during the proceedings and help yourself. Consider yourself at home. This is an intimate gathering. This is more like family, so it's informal. Tonight, I'm really pleased to introduce Emmanuel de Guzman, our scholar from the Philippines, who's been with us now for a couple of months. Yeah, working on research.
4 weeks.
4 weeks. Okay, one month, but we'll be here for a while. Before I introduce Manny, though, I want to especially recognize a couple of our guests from the Philippine consulate who've come out. It's Erica Ana Abad and Anita Saldo here from the Philippine consulate. So thanks very much for coming out as well. Manny de Guzman is a Catholic married lay theologian. His wife has been here, Agnes Brazal, has been here with us before, working on a book as well, and we've had a couple of conferences in Manila, and so we've enjoyed Philippine hospitality as well. He's professor of theology in the MA and PhD programs of the St. Vincent School of Theology in Manila, and has had a number of other positions in Manila that you can read about. He's most importantly the co-founder of the Dakateo, which is the Filipino Catholic Theological Society, and author of many published works, which you can see on the little bio that we've left on your chair. He's with us here after having spent part of last year at the Jesuit School of Theology in Santa Clara University, where I think because he studied, got his PhD in Belgium, he missed snow, so decided to come here and be with us, and we're hoping we can get you some snow, Manny, before you take off. I think he also learned to appreciate good beer during his time getting his PhD in Belgium, so we'll hope to get some of that for you as well. Please join me in welcoming Manny de Guzman.
Thank you, Bill, for a generous introduction. I would like to introduce my topic with a photo that I took in Batamban, Cambodia. It's from my school of children, mostly, well, all of them are children of farmers and brick makers. This picture really struck me when I visited the place. Well, first of all, I think you call them flip-flops here.
Yeah.
Flip-flops. In the Philippines, we call them slippers or sandals. That is the footwear of choice in many places in Southeast Asia. For one, the hot and humid weather makes wearing socks and closed shoes uncomfortable. And besides, you have to remove your slippers or flip-flops whenever you enter a place, be it a home, an office, or a temple. When one walks barefoot inside the place, cleanliness is maintained. But more importantly, it is a gesture of respect to the owners of the house or to a sacred place. As you can see in the slide, there's a variety of colors, of shapes, of sizes. Some of them are on the ground. They are in a classroom, and I observed last January when I did my ground research that they were interacting and learning from one another. The teachers and the administrators of the school, and the school is actually managed by the Salesian priest, the Don Bosco Vocational School, they are cultivating the virtues of trust and mutual support. I think it's important to situate the context of this building of virtues of trust and support in a nation that has faced unspeakable tragedies of 50 years of civil wars, especially during the short but brutal regime of the Khmer Rouge in the 1970s, that killed over 1.2 million of its own people. As the young principal said to me, we are trying to educate the children that they have innate human dignity and rights which they have to cherish and protect. The school is not only a place of formal education, it is also a training ground for becoming more humane and just. Although I cannot remove my shoes here because it's not customary in your cultures, I would like to give the same respect and gratitude, especially to DePaul University and the Center for World Catholicism and Intercultural Theology, for giving me time to speak before you and accepting me as a research fellow for 3 months. At any rate, that respect, I will put it symbolically. The children that you see here, my actual footage of the school, they look happy, joyful, and many times I attended also their own rituals, which included different traditions within a Catholic ritual. On the picture down below is the, how they call it, they will build a new building. Is it groundbreaking, how do you call that? Yeah, groundbreaking ceremony where they had an intercultural ritual. I am reminded of a voice of an old wise man that I am to remove my sandals, for I am standing on a holy ground. And as Jesus of Nazareth instructed his disciples, I dust off my feet, still hoping you would welcome me and listen to you. And for this, I greet you, peace be with you, and good evening to all. The experience with the Cambodian school children led me to a search for insights related to my research. Somehow they say things about the vast majority of people who are living in poverty, yet rich in cultural and religious traditions, and among them is a small presence of Catholics. Tonight, my topic is about the unity or oneness of the Church. It is one of the traditional marks or characteristics or attributes of the Church that we recite in the Nicene Creed. We believe in the one, Holy, Catholic, Apostolic Church. In the Asian context, the Federation of Asian Bishops' Conferences, or FABC, has repeatedly exhorted that the unity of the Church in Asia is to be found in what has been termed as triple dialogue. Dialogue with the poor, dialogue with cultures, and dialogue with the religions of the Asian peoples. In their 5th Plenary Assembly in 1990 in Bandung, Indonesia, the Asian bishops said, in an Asian marked by diversity and torn by conflicts, the Church must in a special way be a sacrament, a visible sign and instrument of unity and harmony. For the FABC, harmony is not simply the absence of strife, described as live and let live. The test of true harmony, according to the bishops, lies in the acceptance of diversity as richness. In this lecture, I ask what vision and practice of unity or oneness can come about in Southeast Asia, where different cultures or ethnicities are negotiating their own places in the Christian communities, and how the Catholic Church is navigating its identity and role in a region marked with social, economic, political, and religious challenges. In other words, how does the Catholic Church in Southeast Asia live up to its unity or oneness or harmony? The Southeast Asian region consists of the countries of Laos, Myanmar, Cambodia, Vietnam, Singapore, Malaysia, Brunei Darussalam, Indonesia, Philippines, and East Timor. I begin with some brief considerations of the socio-historical realities within which the Church is embedded. Second, I shall map the praxis of unity or oneness of the Church through the use of sociological and pastoral models. Third, I shall offer some appreciative and critical remarks or commentaries on the three models. And in my fourth part or section, I shall describe the model of an intercultural church as an emerging Catholic praxis in Southeast Asia. General considerations. Four general considerations might help situate the Catholic praxis in Southeast Asia. First, Catholics and generally Christians in Southeast Asia are a minority in numbers. Of the over 600 million people, there are 240 million Muslims, 150 million Buddhists, 125 million Christians, 7 million Hindus, and 50 million followers of indigenous religions. Catholics are a minority among the minority, with Protestants and evangelical groups having more members. Timor-Leste and the Philippines are the only two countries where over 85% of the population are Catholics. Remove the 90 million Catholics from the 125 million Christians, Catholicism is less than 1% of the Southeast Asian population. Much more, if you remove the 80 million East Timorese, then I think you have a negligible percentage of Catholics in Southeast Asia. Just to give you some personal profiles. A friend of mine lives with his family in a suburb in Yangon, Myanmar. They are the only Catholics in the village of more than 200 households. All are Buddhist and believers of Nats, or unseen spirits. Another friend, an Indonesian, works in Jakarta. He attends a Catholic Bible sharing group of 5 regular members in a building of 500 employees, all of whom are Muslims. In northern part of Vietnam, a former student, now a priest, is always asked by non-religious friends about the relevance of his religious faith in relation to the communist program. In the words of the late Bishop Yves Ramus of Cambodia, the Catholic Church is a simple seed lost in an immense rice paddy. A second consideration is the cultural pluralism in Southeast Asia. Covering only 3% of the total land area and inhabited by about 9% of the world's population, Southeast Asia has a multiplicity of histories, civilizations, cultures, philosophies, religions, languages, political systems, and in different stages of economic development. The heterogeneous character makes the region the most culturally plural and diverse in the whole world. This profile is not only between countries, but also within a particular country and even within a city. As Hans-Dieter Evers and Rüdiger Korff view Southeast Asia, there are similarities, but they are similarities of diversity. Making the present-day situation complex is that in the last 2 decades, land and sea, as well as in neighborhoods, workplaces, religious structures, and symbolic heritages have become increasingly contested areas for the struggle of identity, dignity, and survival, sometimes with violent confrontation. Social scientists Julius Bautista and Anthony Reid have noted that in Southeast Asia today, a more exclusivist character tempers religious plurality. In the last 2 decades, there has been a tightening of ring fences in Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Myanmar, Thailand, Brunei, and even in the Philippines. Amidst the diversity of cultures and after 500 years, Catholicism still is perceived as a Western or foreign religion. Now, other religions came also from the outside, such as Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism. But what distinguishes Catholicism as a foreign religion is in terms of its liturgies, doctrines, theology, and organizational structures, and even as the ways of speaking, dressing, and eating. I traveled around Southeast Asian countries, and I hear repeatedly from my guides that whenever we speak English, people would say, you're probably a Catholic. Because it is in the Catholic institutions where people get educated. And it seems that education is, in English language, is associated with Catholicism. And while not synonymous, Catholicism is also perceived as a modern or Western way of living that vary from or clash with the local cultures. For a third consideration, Southeast Asia is undergoing rapid social changes brought about by closer economic cooperation and competition. This regional integration of economic globalization is being driven by the governments of 10 nations belonging to the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, sometimes ASEAN. The ASEAN was founded in 1967, but it is only in the last 2 decades that closer trading relationships have developed. Today, the vision of ASEAN is for Southeast Asian nations to become a regional community with one single market, one single production base, and one economic community. To realize this vision, trade and legal restrictions have been lifted since December 2015. This allows now the free flow of goods, services, investments, capital, and skilled labor among the 10 member nations. In the long term, the ASEAN foresees a region that is outward-looking, living in peace, stability, and prosperity, bonded together in partnership and dynamic economic development, and in a community of caring societies. The domestic and international migrants are the most active participants of the economic integration. In fact, they are the real builders of the economic integration and the carriers of cultural change. They are making possible the transfer, crossing, and passage not only of material and technological resources, but also of cultural capital. Among Catholic migrants, one of the first places they seek in a new land is a church, hoping they will find someone from the same village, region, or country, and who speak their language. A fourth consideration is the relationship that states or governments have with the Catholic Church. Like cultures, there are different models of government systems in the region, including military junta, military-backed civilian government, constitutional monarchy, absolute monarchy, communist regimes, and democracy in varied shapes. In much of Southeast Asia, governments and local communities have been ambivalent, if not antagonistic, to Catholic presence, which is suspected of being directed by Western powers or undermining government programs and structures. There are also legal and political restrictions, as well as persecutions that impact on the public living out of the Catholic faith. The Catholics' engagement, meantime, in socio-political issues is largely influenced by the particular context where they are in. Their responses have ranged from overt prophetic annunciation and denunciation, critical or vigilant collaboration, various advocacies through NGOs, and also a disturbing silence to injustice that can mean fear or indifference or a complicit support to injustices. These four general considerations shape the practice of Catholic unity in different ways and degrees in Southeast Asian countries. Let me just affirm for a moment that despite its numerical smallness and perceived foreign status, the Catholic Church has considerably contributed in nation building, especially in the fields of literacy or education, health and medical services, humanitarian projects, and inter-religious cooperation. In several places too, members of the Catholic Church have participated in national liberation or independence movements of their countries. The Catholic community too, when compared to other religious communities, welcomes people of different ethnic backgrounds. Ethnic peoples who have become members of the Church are often the most vulnerable groups who are targets of social, political, religious, and ideological discrimination. And it is also in the Church that migrants find a home away from home. I would like now to sketch the Catholic praxis of unity coming from the actual experiences of local churches. The models, or simply approaches, are descriptive rather than prescriptive. I draw some pointers from the social sciences to understand what's going on in the pastoral field and to examine their theological underpinnings. The models or approaches are not exclusive of each other. Practices cut across various models. While the models attempt to describe the actual experiences, they are also exploratory for further studies and reflections. Unity in the dominant monocultural church. One model of church unity is within the dominant monocultural church. In the model, people of varied ethnic backgrounds are incorporated into the one church, which usually has the ethnicity of the majority or dominant culture. Different ethnic groups become one or united by leaving behind their particular ethnic identities, and they now share a common faith through a set of beliefs, sacraments, and leadership. Most parishes and dioceses in the Philippines are features of a dominant monocultural church. There are about 100 ethnic groups in the Philippines. Many of these are part of the 8 major linguistic groups who reside in the lowland areas. They share a common history and cultural traits that have come from influences of Spanish and American colonization and evangelization. It is often said in jest that we lived for 350 years inside the Spanish convent and enjoyed 50 years of Hollywood. Other indigenous communities in the mountains and coastal areas were not totally colonized, as well as in large portions of Mindanao and Sulu in the southern archipelago, where Muslims are the majority. They have distinct cultures apart from the lowland Filipinos. They are upholding their cultural rights in relation to the land upon which their ancestors had lived even before the coming of the colonizers. Where Catholicism is the majority at 85% of the population, Catholic parishes, particularly in towns and cities, are like melting pot of different small ethnicities within the major ethno-linguistic groups. While facilitating the interaction of ethnics, the church ministers employ a variety of strategies aimed at persuading the members that they do not only belong to the particular ethnic groupings, but to a larger worldwide community of religious believers. So sometimes in jest again, or in sarcasm, Filipino religiosity is questioned as a Romanized Christianity in terms of its liturgies and rituals, and Vaticanized Catholicism in terms of its beliefs and or doctrines. In this model, pastoral leaders use symbols and narratives in the liturgies and other assemblies that are taken from the culture of the local ethnic people. Unity is guided by some standards or rubrics that are determined by the ministers of the dominant culture, who as hosts accommodate the various ethnics into the one ecclesial community. In the small, oil-rich nation of Brunei's Darussalam, the Catholics are only 5% of the national population of 500,000. The small number of Catholics, along with the process of Islamization and restrictions for public practice of other religions, have made it critical for the Church to maintain its religious identity, where 90% are Muslims. Strikingly, 70% of the 25,000 Catholics in Brunei are Filipino migrants, to the extent that the religious activities like masses have a strong Filipino tradition, even if the ordained ministers come from Malaysia and Singapore. The other Catholic migrants from Indonesia, Malaysia, India, and some indigenous communities are absorbed in this Filipino-dominated church. In other parts of Asia, or Southeast Asia, the dominant monocultural church is found in the nation's capitals and cities. The church becomes a hub of different ethnics of migrants from the countryside moving to the city seeking for jobs. Greater tolerance is needed to ease intergroup tensions and to help them cooperate under the direction of the majority ethnic group. For the Cardinal of Thailand, the mission of the church is to spread the word of God to ethnic groups in rural areas. According to the Cardinal, and I quote, "There are some ethnic groups that already have basic values, for example, love and being faithful, which happens to match what we believe in. That is why we're trying to offer them an alternative religion on top of what they already believe in." In the case of Singapore, Catholicism is marked out not so much by ethnic belongings, but by socioeconomic features, such as, among professionals, the well-educated, middle-class, English-speaking, and private housing dwellers. Foreign migrants or guests from the Philippines, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Bangladesh are absorbed into the established parishes where English is the medium of communication. In this city-state, racial over-assertion and discrimination are not tolerated. And so the Singaporean church must promote also racial harmony. Chaplaincy works for non-Singaporeans to respond to specific concerns, but the effort is to link them to the mainstream parishes. In the dominant monocultural church, while people have different ethnic identities, they should belong to the one Catholic Church. In sociality, the dominant monocultural church functions as a socialization agent that integrates the ethnics into the national society through shared language, values, and practices. The dominant monocultural church has its contribution not only in forging relationship among the Catholic members, but also to society at large. Firstly, degrading and marginalizing conducts towards other ethnics are to be eliminated. In places where ethnic tensions are prevalent, the dominant monocultural church is the space where they can tolerate each other and share religious commonalities as a community of believers and belonging to one universal or global church. Secondly, being Malay, Chinese, or Tamil have no bearing on the foundational truth that all are children of God. The dominant monocultural church provides the space where people of different ethnicities converge towards becoming a community where faith in Christ is the unifying factor rather than the social characteristics. Moreover, in this model, ethnic people are viewed as needing purification from their superstitious and queer practices that are rooted in some primitive or pre-enlightenment worlds. In many parts of Southeast Asia, the beliefs and practices are mostly about venerating the dead or the ancestors and the unseen spirits. As one Myanmar religious sister said, "I am a Catholic already who have accepted the religion as a way of life. I do not need to believe and practice anymore the animist religions of my parents and ancestors, and for that, they call me a foreigner." Unity in the ethnic church. A second church model of unity in Southeast Asia is the ethnic church. Different from the dominant monocultural church, the ethnic church is composed of a single ethnic group. In this church model, people worship using their ethnic language, symbols, and rituals. In Southeast Asia, they might be residing in a particular area of a town or city where they have retained their sense of community and their traditions. This model thrives also where Catholics are a minority group and where Catholics are geographically dispersed, as well as among those sharing migrant and immigrant status. Historically, Catholicism was introduced by the European colonizers to particular ethnic communities, and till this day, the religion in those places has distinct ethnic features, although colonial traces are still visibly in church architecture and religious artifacts. For instance, in East Nusa Tenggara in Indonesia, of which Flores, Sumba, and West Timor are the largest among the more than 500 islands, Catholicism was introduced by the Portuguese in the 16th century. Today, East Nusa Tenggara is the only province in Indonesia where Catholic Christians are the majority in the country. In Laos, 7 million people are stratified according to ethnic identities, and nearly all villages are ethnically homogeneous, as they were found by the French missionaries during the colonial period. Christians comprise only 1.5% of the population, and they are also separated geographically and ethnically. Among the Christians are 45,000 Catholics, who are clustered in two major ethnic groups. The Catholic Vietnamese are concentrated in major urban centers and surrounding areas along the Mekong River, while the Catholic Lao Luong, or native to Lao, live in the lowland areas. It is to be expected that the local churches in these two socially and geographically separated groups would have the hues, tone, shape, and texture of the specific ethnic identities. Particular maybe to Southeast Asia, ethnic churches arise also as a consequence of geopolitics. In this regard, the Church of Myanmar is instructive. There are what the military regime calls 8 major national ethnic races. These include the Bamar or Burma, which is the largest ethnic group. People from this ethnic hold important positions in politics, education, economics, and civil institutions. There are also Kachin and the Shan in the north and northwest respectively. They are engaged in armed struggle for autonomy. Moreover, the Kaya, Kayin, Chin, Mon, and Rakhine are also separated geographically. Within these major groups are over 135 different tribal subgroups with distinct lifestyles. Political scientists have described Myanmar as governed by an ethnocentric state in which the military-controlled government, institutions, and policies are pivotal in giving preference to one ethnic group and in creating conditions of ethnic strife, deliberately, implicitly, or in complicit ways, and sometimes as an active participant in the conflicts. The demographic population is engineered in such a way that large minorities are located in the periphery and the one majority, the Burma, in the center, in Yangon and Mandalay. This arrangement divides the country into blocks of power, definable in terms of ethnic backgrounds and with very little empathy for understanding for each other. For example, there is ample evidence that the military regime has supported or endorsed the fundamentalist Buddhist violent expulsion of Muslims in Rakhine State, who are considered by the government as non-citizens of Myanmar. What has been the effect of such social, political, and geographical arrangement on the church? A layperson I interviewed, and an influential layperson in the Catholic Church too, critically perceived the Myanmar bishops and the Catholic Church as a whole as tribal. The dioceses follow the geopolitical divisions and are concerned primarily, if not exclusively, with their own ethnic groups. This hampers the work for the common positions as regards national issues like human rights violations. Even the ethnic name Rohingya is not mentioned by the church hierarchy. As one higher-ranking cleric admitted to me, it is also a question of survival. We don't want to antagonize the military regime that can affect more severe consequences on the church. The seeming silence or indifference of the hierarchy to social and political issues is partly explained by their lack of training in critical thinking and prophetic action, because during their seminary days and through their priestly ministry, the military regime curtailed civil liberties and watched suspiciously the works of the church. In other places of the region, a pastoral strategy to nurture the unity of the church is by organizing neighborhood or basic ecclesial communities along ethnic lines. Where Catholics are a minority, the small Catholic communities are struggling to maintain its religious identity. Such is the case of the communities in Malaysia, where the emphasis is on intra-church communion among the people sharing similar ethnic background. According to Edmund Cha, these communities have been successful in nurturing Christian brotherhood and sisterhood. But Cha also sees some tendencies of becoming Christian ghettos at the expense of interreligious relations. The communities are almost exclusively concerned with their internal life, without needing support and friendship of peoples of other religions and ethnics who live in the same neighborhood. For migrant-based ethnic churches, underlying this model is that migration is significantly a social and cultural experience. When people are in lands other than their own, they carry their collective history and they need not lose their cultural soul, according to this model. It is further argued that the identity of the migrants has to be sustained so that people do not give up many of their cherished values. To override the feeling of out of place, migrants seek to feel in place by transposing material artifacts and other familiar elements of the religious terrain of their places of origin into the newly created spaces. This way, metaphorically, the church is like a spice that serves as additive, preservative, or gives binding strength to cultures. As spices accentuate the flavor of the food, the ethnic churches bring out the individuality of the cultures and deepen the flavor. Like the spice, the ethnic church is a conserver of cultural identity. Unity in the multicultural or multi-ethnic church. A third model of church in Southeast Asia is the multiculturalist or multi-ethnic church. This model addresses the presence of two or more ethnic identities, thus the prefix multi or multi. This model respects the diversity of identities by embracing all kinds of people in the church. Strategically, this model brings together the dominant monocultural church and the ethnic-based church. In this church, different ethnic groups are allowed to organize themselves. They coexist with one another, where coexistence means permitting the ethnic groups to do their own liturgies, programs, and activities with their own leadership, in their own time, and sometimes with assigned rooms in the parish center. There is no need for ethnics to co-create a larger Christian community, except in big celebrations of the parish. The multiculturalist model assumes that cultures or ethnicities are autonomous spheres with their own histories, identities, traditions, and languages. It is envisioned that the convergence of people into their respective cultural groups and geographical locales is good for the social cohesion toward the achievement of the unity of the church. Metaphorically, the multiculturalist church is like the Southeast Asian bowl of stir-fried noodles and vegetables, consisting of separate ingredients, each with its own taste, shape, texture, and identity. These ingredients are tossed and joined together without losing their identities. Society, or the church, is the sum total of all cultures. The tossing and joining of almost independent groups is not easy. And here I would like to give the example of the Church of Cambodia. A bishop and several priests I interviewed used the phrases new church, new Christianity, or infant church in the light of the effects of the Khmer Rouge that left the Catholic Church decimated in human and physical resources. There were no priests and all the church buildings were destroyed or bombed by the Khmer Rouge. According to them, if not for the ethnic Vietnamese, the birthing of the new church or new Christianity may have been more difficult. Population-wise, the ethnic Vietnamese are only 5% of Cambodia's total population of 5.3 million. Many ethnic Vietnamese have lived in Cambodia for generations, but compared to other people, they still are living in poverty and have less access to decent housing and education. They are also disenfranchised from political processes and are considered ambiguously as foreign residents. The Vietnamese marginal status takes a different turn in the Catholic Church. Although they are few in the national population, the ethnic Vietnamese comprise 2/3 of the Catholic Church population of 23,000, with the remaining 1/3 for the Khmers. In other words, by sheer numbers, the ethnic Vietnamese are in a position to influence the shape and the direction of the church. These two ethnic resources pose a great challenge to the unity of the Cambodian church. There is first of all the language problem. Many older ethnic Vietnamese speak little Cambodian language or none at all. This limitation spills over to the church, particularly in worship gatherings. Because the ethnic Vietnamese cannot speak and understand the Khmer language, the parishes employ the strategy of celebrating the Eucharist in Vietnamese language with separate schedule for a Khmer language mass, as there are also scheduled masses for foreign immigrants like English-speaking mass, French-speaking, and Korean-speaking. The pastoral effort is to accommodate the two ethnicities, but it appears that worship particularly has become a boundary marker of identity and community. There is also a gap in cultures between the Vietnamese and the Khmer. Culturally, in everyday living, the two peoples have different origins, language, customs, cultures, and religions. Cambodians are mainly followers of the Theravada Buddhism, while the Vietnamese follow the Mahayana Buddhism. Moreover, my resource persons observe that while the Khmer Catholics are receptive to new understandings about the Christian faith along the lines of Vatican II, the Vietnamese Catholics tend to stick to the more traditional, sacramental, liturgical beliefs and practices. Socially, the Cambodians and the Vietnamese have a volatile relationship. Centuries of historical experiences of invasion and resistance have produced negative stereotypes and biases that are etched on the collective psyche of both groups. Given the ethnic gaps, some priests are doubtful if the Cambodian church can really be united. Francois Ponchot, who has written extensively on the history of Cambodian church and a missionary of 50 years, thinks there are many irreconcilable differences between the two cultural groups. For him, it is best to divide the church into two churches, with the hierarchy prioritizing the native Cambodian Khmer. His view is shared by other priests. The bishops, however, continue to believe that unity is possible to bring the two different ethnic groups into one Cambodian church. The former Vicar Apostolic of Phnom Penh, the late Bishop Emmanuel de Guzman, believes that it is faith in Christ that will make it possible to have unity in diversity. The mentalities of these two ethnic groups, according to the bishop, are quite different, but our task is to find unity. The fact that there are two different masses with different languages and different meeting places, the church community is also prone to competition and rivalry over the attention of the ministers and the resources of the church. Hence, it does not mean when a church has diversity, it cherishes diversity. At any rate, although the communities are separated by ethnic markers, the ministers envision that all are to be united in the one church of Christ. Each community strives to be faithful to Christ's teachings and to work out their expressions of discipleship that fit their culture's ways. In the social milieu, the presence of ethnic communities in the church offers the society the much-needed respect for the ethnic peoples, especially those that are discriminated or marginalized. The model invites people to be themselves and actively celebrate their unique difference. The multiculturalist church strengthens bridges among people of similar ethnic backgrounds whose identities are otherwise ignored or denied in the larger society. I'd like to go back to the image of the small seed in the rice paddy that Bishop Ramus uses. While the church is governed by certain norms and structures from the dike or from the rim, life on the muddy ground has many twists and bends, mutations and variegations. Ingenuity, inventiveness, and creativity are found in the rice field of ethnicities. While the dominant monocultural church seeks universality or uniformity that ethnic peoples have to subscribe, there are many fusions and novelties being produced by people to make the Christian faith more culturally intelligible and socially relevant to people. In this regard, popular religiosity in the dominant monocultural church is not really a departure from the officially known Catholicism, but in fact, it is the Christian faith embodied and expressed in a given culture. This way, people do not totally abandon their ethnic identities. They are too resourceful to find ways to blend or mix religious beliefs and practices for their salvific interests. For the ethnic-based church, it appears an alien, an exile, or a stranger in a foreign land, to borrow from the author of the letter to the Hebrews. Disrespected and violated in the larger society by the government or other cultural or religious groups, Catholic ethnics find in their communities a refuge or a safety net of support and solidarity. And amidst the plurality and diversity of cultures in the multiculturalist church, different ethnics are also able to enhance their respective identities. For in this model, cultural variety is promoted, where ethnic groups use the freedom to develop and grow in their communal life of faith. In the multi-ethnic church, people actually intermingle by negotiating with other ethnies in a process of stretching and crossing of boundaries, although not infinitely. People bargain, borrow, share, adapt, or improvise elements from different cultures. Cultures are not closed systems, but are open to influences from the outside. While appreciating the models, there are things that call our attention. A closer look at the three models towards unity or oneness reveals at least three major and for me questionable premises. One premise of the models is a view of culture in an essentialist way. According to this thought, cultural or ethnic groups possess essential features that are unique to them, either based on biological or genetic makeup, ethnic or racial characteristics, economic standing or caste or gender or combination of any of this. Another premise of the three models is the idea of a homogeneous community. Being a community means, in the three models, that people should have similar beliefs, understandings, priorities, values, and practices. It is acknowledged that the churches have the resources to bring people together by forming them into communities where they can relate harmoniously with one another. However, a community that pursues sameness is far from representing the real world. The fact is, people are not the same. They do not think the same way, they do not value the same things, they do not act the same way. A third premise in the models is the community where unity is nurtured, is led, facilitated, or animated by people who have their own ethnic backgrounds. The conciliators or facilitators of unity are in fact in privileged position of norm, and as though they are set apart from and far above other ethnic groups in that church community. In other words, the leaders of these church communities may not be aware that they are socially located in the configurations of power relationship, of domination and marginalization, superiority and inferiority, which comes out in the way they lead or facilitate communities. There is a fourth model of unity that is emerging in Southeast Asia. We call this the Intercultural Church. It takes the multicultural church a step further by promoting meaningful interactions between the various cultural actors towards mutual enrichment and positive change. A thank you from Cardinal Renato Rafaelio Martino, then head of the Pontifical Council for Migrants and Itinerant Peoples, who distinguish interculturality and multiculturalism. Cardinal Martino says, "We are practically insisting on a concept of intercultural societies, meaning those that are capable of interacting and producing mutual enrichment, going beyond multiculturalism that can be contented with a mere juxtaposition of cultures. In Asia, the FABC believes that the very nature of culture demands a new awareness of an intercultural communication of give and take. The Asian bishops state, the survival of any culture depends on its capacity to encounter new forces in dynamic continuity with the past and arrive at ever new synthesis. In the intercultural perspective, cultures are shown to be dynamic, that is, a culture undergoes changes in varying historical conditions. Cultures are also heterogeneous. Within a culture, there are many ways of living, as well as layers of power, domination, and marginalization. And cultures are also negotiated, whereby a culture is open and flexible to influences from other cultures. The negotiation of cultural identity involves the continual interface and exchange of cultural performances that in turn produce a mutual and mutable recognition of cultural difference. Hence, the prefix inter strongly suggests mutual and reciprocal interaction. In a reflexive process of cultural negotiation, the participants do not abandon their identities, but they seek to go beyond their previous wisdom or habitus, and often with a feel for the game, they construct an in-beyond or transcultural community. A few examples may be given of attempts at forming of an intercultural community. In Java, Indonesia's most populous island and where Muslims are the overwhelming majority, Christian communities thrive among diverse ethnic communities who are seeking spiritual paths and religious symbols that fit their cosmic religiosity. John Pryor, who has spent many decades as a missionary in Indonesia, notes that Christianity made inroads in Java due to such interreligious mingling, where cosmic culture and popular religion merge. Within the Javanese context, the ethnic interreligious blending occurs because also the leaders or conciliators of the communities, both ordained and lay, are allowing, and I quote Pryor, a both and or neither nor worldview, but what fits in with one's feeling and intuition. In the process, the church ministers realize that acceptance of internal plurality permits openness to and collaboration with the other. A second example are the experiences of young people in Southeast Asia. In a highly ethnic diversified region, and despite different degrees of political and legal restrictions, Catholic young people are not only filling up the churches during worship gatherings, but they are also becoming the mediators of differing and contending ethnicities. In Cambodia, the youth leaders are at the forefront of building intercultural relationships. What makes these young leaders effective intercultural mediators? From my interviews with them, I gathered three things. Firstly, the team of youth leaders come from varied Khmer and Vietnamese ethnicities. They also speak both Vietnamese and Khmer languages, and this gives them a great advantage to connect the young people to one another. Secondly, because they grew up living in several cultural worlds, they are able to engender mutual empowerment among the youth and appreciate acts of collaboration based on trust and respect for ethnic diversity. And thirdly, because of their young age, they have less baggage of ethnic attitudes and biases that their elders have, and thus are freer to discover newer or fresher and more positive knowledge about the various ethnic groups. A third example is by way of a conference of women. Last January, the Ecclesia of Women in Asia, or EWA, had this biennial conference in Tagaytay, Philippines. It was attended by about 45 women from different countries in Asia, majority of whom are from the Southeast. And I was the only male participant in the conference. In the EWA conference, the conference hall was not only a space for intelligent paper presentations and academic discussions. It was also a space for encountering and celebrating effectively their genders and the sacred. The material objects that the women brought to the conference hall induced the sensory experience of diverse bodies, and at the same time the physicality was colored by the participants' presence and experiences. Flowers, candles, tapestry, table runners, bells, and yes, wine and beer. This helped in creating a calm, attentive, dialogic, conciliatory environment of the conference. In intercultural praxis, I learned that materiality of belief, that means to say tangible objects and physical places with human and religious significance, are not peripheral to and secondary to belief or doctrines, and to theology for that matter. And in many parts of Asia, materials facilitate platforms from which alternative claims to human living are upheld. What can be said about the intercultural church through these experiences? I give in the last part 4 insights that I put forward. First, the experiences suggest an intercultural church is more than respecting diversity of cultures. The movement toward in beyond or transcending identities, participated in by people of diverse identities, makes the intercultural model distinct from other designs. How does it happen? People in intercultural encounters exist in a betwixt and between situation. They live and move and have their being between two cultures, in their own and that of another culture. In the process of surviving in a new space of engagement, they contribute to a rethinking of both cultural traditions and thus pave the way to the emergence of a new and rich culture, that which may be called in beyond culture. This way, the church becomes a third space, an ambiguous area where two or more cultures interact, along with tensions and opportunities for cultural negotiation toward the construction of new collective identities. Second, in an intercultural church, people's identity is not lost or set aside. Interculturality makes people appreciate better the richness of cultures, their own and others. Culture is a synergy of the old and new, past and present, native and foreign, local and global, which people use to enrich their lives and relationships. As one Filipino anthropologist provocatively posited, we are all mestizos, a mixture of many cultural influences within our respective identity. In an intercultural church, as a bridge of solidarity, people can discover their similarities and differences, which can give them not just a sense of identity, but also a sense of affinity with one another. As a bridge, the church as a community links people for the common good, while allowing people to form alliances, creative distances, or shifting alliances. Those who are involved in the process of bridge building are challenged in the intercultural praxis. Rather than experts, they are as much as learners who can be transformed into intercultural persons. Perhaps one of the first things to do is to check and revise their previous understandings and attitudes, including their biases towards people who are different. One steps into not merely a Filipino or Singaporean or Thai church, but an intercultural space. Ways of organizing, structuring, preaching, and celebrating will have to consider the presence of diverse individuals and groups. Textual and oral narratives or discourses, material symbols and ritual performances speak not only of one cultural location, but of deepest human strivings and meanings shared by people in their differences. In the bridge of solidarity, new ministries may have to be developed for intercultural processes, such as Ministry of Welcome, Ministry for Placemaking, Ministry for Intercultural Worship, Ministry for Legal or Paralegal Assistance, Ministry for Undocumented People, Ministry for Peacemaking and Peace Building, Ministry for Interfaith Dialogue, Ministry of Visitation and Support to Vulnerable Peoples, Ministry to Evacuees and Refugees, Ministry for Gender and Women Concerns, and Ministry for the Care of the Environment, especially for disaster readiness, prevention, and rehabilitation. The physical arrangement and ambience of the church or a center will have to be hospitable to receive people of differences and to allow interactive engagements. In this part of the world, the indigenous circular or concentric face-to-face formation of people in meetings, assemblies, and for conflict resolution can be adopted in the church community. More importantly, the intercultural church requires the ministers to exercise a ministry of presence among the different peoples and communities. In Southeast Asia, time is flexible. As the Indonesians call it, rubber time. And there is wisdom in waiting time and wasting time for forming and nurturing interpersonal relationships. Third, interculturality does not ignore or deny the existence of tensions or conflicts in the field of power relations. These are seriously taken into account in the cultural interactions by making people culturally sensitive to their own and to others, while being formed in non-negotiable elements, such as preference for the most vulnerable and ethnic and gender equality. In this regard, the treatment of ethnic identities, differences in the church is closely linked to the treatment of women. In Asia generally, women experience multiple marginalization and oppression. In society at large, in workplaces, in religions, in ethnic communities, and in homes. It is wise to heed the caution of the Council of Europe Ministers of Foreign Affairs against stereotyping or a coded equation between minority communities and gender inequality, as if this issue has already been resolved in a church of various ethnicities. The Council writes, gender equality injects a positive dimension into the intercultural dialogue. The complexity of individual identity allows solidarities inconceivable within a stereotype communalist perspective. This very fact that gender inequality is a cross-cutting issue means that intercultural projects engaging women from minority and host backgrounds may be able to build upon shared experiences. Lastly, how is the community defined in the intercultural church? It is something that the participants will have to search for and articulate. Oneness as the church attribute remains a promise of the Spirit of God, a gift to the whole church, and a task to be worked out in practice. The Trinity provides the central theological motive for the intercultural church. At the heart of the Christian doctrine is the mystery of the one God characterized by relationality, equality and diversity, and creativity. The Trinity speaks of a God who freely initiates friendship, life, and love. In the language of the Creed, God emerges entirely as a God in relation. In the community of friendship, the triune God is animated by mutual partnership and commitment. The discourse of Father, Son, and Spirit is not a hierarchy of persons. There is no first, second, and third places in the Trinity, and there is no higher, middle, and lower states. Rather, while referring to distinct individualities, the Father, the Son, and the Spirit are at the same time equal because they all share the same ousia or substance. God is the one who is both similar and different. In this diversity, God's gracious love is abundant to flow in the creation of the universe, and that same love continuously overflows to produce goodness in every creature. This means that all things and persons of whatever identity are potentially or in fact actual bearers of the Trinitarian love. For these reasons, the intercultural community welcomes the others as equals with their diverse gifts to co-create the church into the image of the Trinity. Conclusion. This lecture has attempted to sketch an itinerary of the church in the context of the provision and praxis of unity or oneness of the church in Southeast Asia. Each model of unity has its usefulness or relevance to the particular context of the local churches. Each model has potentials to forge and strengthen the unity of the members. Along the way, I have used metaphors from the culinary world to speak of the experiences of the Catholic Church. A question may still be raised. What is the shape of this church that practices interculturality? There is a snack in many Southeast Asian places. In the Philippines, it is called halo-halo, literally mixed together. Other places in the region has this refreshment and it comes by many names. Halo-halo is a mixture of fruits, nuts, and jellies with shaved ice milk, sometimes coconut milk. As the ingredients are stirred, some of the elements of the ingredients are released and they blend with the compounds of the other ingredients. The fruits still retain their identities, yet their flavors have become rich because of their commingling with other fruits. The engagement of the ingredients transcends, as it were, their original or distinct identities to create a new identity out of the mixing and blending. The taste of each fruit still is the same but different. The taste of each ingredient is still recognizable, but it has been transformed to something better because of the interfusion of other ingredients. The result is a flavor-rich snack with an in-beyond identity that is richly hued by the variety of colors. The intercultural church, like halo-halo, does not promise to solve problems of cultural and religious conflicts. It will take a process of mixing and blending, of mutual negotiation and exchanges. Biases and prejudices will be expressed and examined, including those of the ministers. But the space of mutual trust, equality, and interconnectedness by an intercultural community can hopefully transform people. The taste of this Southeast Asian church is yet to be savored. but it is an exciting opportunity to mix experiences and traits in order to produce something more delightful in the cuisine of Southeast Asian relations. It is said that because of the pleasurable taste, halo-halo replenishes the body, soothes and balances the psycho-emotional self, and most of all, when eaten with the family or friends, it strengthens the sense of unity or oneness. It is, after all, the work of God, the great halo-halo blender, who is ultimately responsible for the Intercultural Church. As the Indonesian saying goes, the meals of God grind slowly but surely. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, man. That was very interesting. Is this on? Yeah, it is. In Chicago here, we have a lot of ethnic churches, and I teach a course on ethnic Catholicism because you've got Chinese Catholic churches and Polish Catholic churches and Mexican and African American and so on. One thing I mean, we still have immigrants, but a lot of these immigrant churches came a while ago, and there was a moment at which you had these very strong ethnic churches, and now people tend to, after a few generations, have just kind of blended in. And America has been called not so much an intercultural society, but a post-cultural society. You know, when you have immigrants coming from everywhere, and everybody's an immigrant, they kind of create this sort of other thing, which is being American, which in many ways is kind of post-cultural. You trade in your bagpipes and haggis for, you know, McDonald's hamburgers, and you kind of lose any sense of culture at all. So the challenge here is different. I mean, is that the case anywhere in Asia, or is the dynamic different? And do you agree with you've spent some time in the U.S. Do you agree with the idea that the U.S. is a post-cultural society as opposed to a multicultural or intercultural society?
I'm not sure how the post-cultural society applies to the church here. On the ground, I think that when people go to church and you meet different ethnicities or identities, certainly you get a sense of the willingness to engage in interactions. Yet when they go back home, or to their communities or to their neighborhood, they still speak their language, or they still eat their own ethnic food. The best, I think, comparison, if I make it to the Southeast Asia, would fall more into the first model, the dominant monocultural model, where different ethnicities in the Philippines have merged or blended into the one church. And in that sense, it's not easy anymore to identify really where that person comes from, because it has blended already in the church. The intercultural community, I think, suggests that what I've been talking about here is a search for another identity beyond my respective identity. Now, I don't know if that is called post-cultural, but certainly it can be said it is that and this, but neither this nor that. So what is that? I don't know how you call that here, and that's why my imagery of the halo-halo in Southeast Asia speaks of that. So I think in the intercultural church, people are, I'm not sure about the concept of the post-cultural society. But again, in the intercultural perspective, it is not really losing one's identity, especially in the context of Southeast Asia, where there is pride in the ethnic identity. Now, I don't know here, maybe it's already gone because of the immigrants, but in Southeast Asia it's still quite strong in the church or in the local churches, and therefore losing the ethnic identity seems to be, how do you call it, can be very disappointing or frustrating on the part of the ethnic people. I'm not sure, Bill, about the post-cultural society.
Yeah, I mean, what I mean by that is, I guess, I'm Polish, Irish, and German, and, we might, on St. Patrick's Day, we'll have corned beef or something, and that's about all that's left of the Irish, and we make Polish sausage once a year, and that's about it. That's all that's left of the Polish, and so on. And I think that's the case for a lot of people in the U.S. that,
I think perhaps the difference in the Southeast Asian context still the strong sense of community, and therefore community in relation to the ethnic identity. People, it seems, don't want to give it up. And in fact, as I've said in the last 2 decades, ethnic identity has become one of the issues of even violent confrontations in some places in Southeast Asia. So the problem for the local church is how to not only respect it, but also to promote ethnic identities, but at the same time, engaging people to go beyond or to learn more or new things from other cultures which they can integrate within their own identity.
Other questions?
Or maybe sharing your own experience of this. Yes, right.
We hear about Myanmar, the issue between the Muslims and the Buddhists. In the Philippines, we hear about the poverty. Even when the Pope came, Francis went to Philippines, they made sure first he was not given access to those poor slum areas. Of course, later on, he found a place. In Indonesia, other than Singapore and Malaysia, a little bit of Malaysia, the rest of the Southeast Asia, the poverty, unemployment is a key issues. How the church, the Bishops' Conference, addresses these are the vital issues in Myanmar or the Philippines. Just like any other country, most of the time the Catholic Church doesn't involve. They always maintain the status quo unless it hurts them. They don't mind about, they're simply, satisfied with running the administration of the church, the worship service and all those things, but they never involved to the core of the issues. But do you think the SABC, the South Asian Bishop, addressed some of these issues to show that we Christians are unique, are special, are a kind of witness?
Yes, I think you are correct in your perception that, I may add simply that we have to take it context by context. I have mentioned already that in many places in Southeast Asia, there is an ambiguous or ambivalent relationship with the church. And there are legal and political restrictions. And all this affect the public, the services of the church. But one thing that I find in a way with success, or you can say success stories, is the Caritas. The social service arm of the Bishops' Conferences and even of the dioceses. Let me give you about Myanmar. I spent a lot of time with the staff of the Caritas in Myanmar. And they indeed explained that it's difficult to reach out to people, even to serve, to give social services to people, because of the religious factor, and also because the military, during still, under the military regime or junta, was watching over the activities of the church. But they said it took the cyclone, I forgot the name, in 2009, no? The super typhoon in 2009 that really gave great havoc to Myanmar, to break the ice, so to speak. No? And the church, the Myanmar church, the volunteers, went to the flooded areas, not only distributing goods to those who were evacuated, or who evacuated from the residences to higher places, but they find the reception of people a breakthrough also for the church, for them, because as one staff member said, it was the first in a long time that we are able to really work with people in terms of the social services, and they receiving warmly or favorably the work of the church. In other parts of Asia, this where sometimes I try to be overly critical. I say, why is the church not getting involved in socio-political issues? And I think doing my research on the ground makes me understand more. There are constraints, in fact, religious and political constraints, but it must be admitted there is also an attitude of indifference. As one author in the studying the Church of Malaysia says that it is becoming to be a ghetto church, a church that is involved with its own internal life at the expense of relating with other religions. The FABC, the Federation of Asian Bishops' Conferences, is a forum or a network of support and solidarity, but it doesn't have a juridical powers, and therefore it has many beautiful, wonderful pastoral statements. But how it is done on the local level or on the grassroots level, I think raises a lot of questions, if not difficulties. But as I've said, one of the success stories that I found would be the work of the social services arm of the church. In the Philippines, well, it's a different story altogether. And the church has been very active there in many different ways. But again, outside of the Philippines, it's quite a different situation altogether.